Greetings from the Tech Cave, Fenris here, and today we are taking a look at a copy of Double Dragon on the Geo MVS. Now, this was a game that I got with a lot of broken Geo MVS games, and I was able to repair each one, including this one. Actually, this one only needed a bit of cleaning. But there's a bit of a problem. I already have a copy of Double Dragon on the MVS, and I don't really need a second one, so what's one to do? Well, since I did recently restore a Neo Geo AES, how about we convert this from MVS to something like this, an AES cartridge. Now, you may be wondering, why on earth would you want to do that? Well, that's mainly because AES games are really expensive, and a lot of the AES counterparts to the MVS games are also really expensive, whereas MVS games are, relatively speaking, rather affordable. So, instead of having to deal with converters and whatnot, how about we just take the ROM set from an MVS game and put it on an AES cartridge. So let's not waste any time and get to it. So the first order of business is opening up the MVS cartridge. So let's get our screwdriver here and get this cartridge open. So now that we got the 4 screws removed, we can now go ahead and lift this shell up and get access, come on, oops, to the motherboard. Let's just put this here so I can prop it up a bit. Alright, here we are, and we got our prog board. This is a prog 4096B, and our CHA board. This is a CHA 42G-3. This is the minimum board set that a Double Dragon can be placed on. So now that we got the prog board and the CHA board exposed, what we're going to do is we're going to remove all the mask ROMs from our MVS cartridge, so that way we can transfer it over to our AES donor. So, we'll start with the prog board since that has just 3 ROMs, and then we'll make our way to the CHA board since that has way more ROMs to extract. So, without further delay, let's get to it. Okay, so now that we got the P1, V1, and V2 safely extracted from the prog board, we can now turn our attention to the bigger of the two boards, and that is the CHA board. Now, as you can see, we have all 8 of our C ROMs populated, as well as our M1 and S1 ROMs. So, without further delay, let's get this board flipped over and extract all these ROMs. All right, and with that, we have our full Double Dragon ROM set here. So with the MVS ROM set extracted, we can pull this aside and talk about the AES. Okay, so in order to convert an MVS cartridge to an AES cartridge, we obviously need an AES donor. So we're going to go ahead and not use this copy of Fatal Fury Special, and instead use a pre-converted copy of Double Dragon. Now, this one isn't really a conversion per se, rather, someone took a bunch of EP ROMs and put it onto an AES cartridge. So whatever happened to the original AES ROM set, Lord knows. But as you can see, this is not a good conversion. The cover is in pretty bad quality. And if we were to take a look at the cartridge itself, they only gave us the move set rather than a manual. And the cartridge, the cartridge is also printed in rather low quality. The only high quality part is the SNK and Neo Geo logos, and even then they had to apply some artificial sharpening just to get it looking good. And worse yet, the label's already starting to peel. So yeah, this is a pretty poor conversion cartridge. So we're going to go ahead and use this as our donor cart for the Double Dragon. Okay, so to open an AES cartridge, it is neither easy nor pleasant. It's actually rather difficult and can be a bit headache-inducing. So, as you can see with the AES cartridge, unlike the MVS cartridge, there's no screws, which means, much like a Famicom cartridge, this thing is held on with tabs. But unlike a Famicom cartridge where it's rather small and it's only 4 tabs, this thing has 8 tabs all along the edges here, and it's rather large in size. In fact, for comparison's sake, here's a Genesis game on top of a Neo Geo AES cartridge. Yeah, you can see the differences in scale here. So, needless to say, this is going to be a little tricky. So, the way I go about it is I use a plastic spudger. I've seen videos where people use metal spudgers, and as I've mentioned in the past, do not use a metal spudger on plastic material. You will damage the plastic if you do that. So, what we need to do is figure out where the tabs are. So, I believe the tab is going to be located on the front shell here. So we're going to start from the bottom shell, and we're going to try to pry it open with the plastic spudger. See if I can get it from here. I think I got one tab. Yep, there we go. Once we got one side going, then we can start with the other. You just want to take your time, because you can easily break the tabs if you're not careful. There we go. Go along the edge. All right. So now we can flip this thing open. Okay, so it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tabs. But now we have access to the Prog and Cha. And as you can see, yep, this thing is using EP ROMs. And I can actually kind of guess what donor they used with this. So we have a Prog top and a Cha 256B board. This is the common configuration used for Samurai Spirits 2, which, yes, is a rather common-ish game for the AES, but the fact that they had to sacrifice it is kind of a bummer. But hey, at the very least, we do have some nice EP ROMs here. We have 2 M27C160s. Let me see what this one is. Oh, 3 27C160s, 4 27C322s, as well as a 1000 and 1001 EPROM. So at the very least, we can remove these EPROMs and recycle them. So without further delay, let's get to desoldering these. Okay, so with all the EPROMs removed from the prog and child board, we can now proceed with installing our mask ROMs. Now, in terms of making any sort of adjustments to the board, we don't need to make any adjustments to the prog board due to the fact that we removed the same amount of ROMs from the prog board, and as well, these are all the same size as the EPROMs we removed. The child board, on the other hand, we have twice the amount of C-ROMs than we removed. And in addition, I can see that this board was modified in order to accommodate for the larger 32 megabit or 4 megabyte EPROMs. So what we'll need to do is we will need to move around a few jumpers in order to set this board back to 16 megabit or 2 megabyte mode. So that way it will properly interface with C1 to C8. And in terms of like M1 and S1, no jumpers need to be moved in order to make those work. So without further delay, let's get to swapping. So now that we got the CHA 256 board into frame, we can now turn our attention to the jumper sets. So the first set of jumpers that we're working with are J10 and J9. These need to be relocated to J7 and J8. The reason why is J5 to J10 are correlating with basically telling the board as to what our largest ROM size is for the C-ROMs. Now, in the case of what was on here previously, that would have been the 27C322, which is 4 megabytes or 32 megabits in size. The mask ROMs that we're working with, on the other hand, the largest is 2 megabytes or 16 megabits in size, and this can be verified by looking at a Double Dragon Neo Geo ROM set, which would tell you C1 to C8 are the largest anyways, is 2 megabytes or 16 megabits. So as a result, we need to move these two jumpers to J7 and J8. Now, if our largest was any smaller, we'd have to move it to J6 and J5. Now, as for J11 to J18, these correlate with the individual ROMs themselves. So we don't need to move J17 and J18. That's the correct settings for C5 to C8. However, J11 and J12 are set for 32 megabit or 4 megabyte mode for C1 to C4. So therefore, we need to move these two jumpers to J15 and J16. So without further delay, let's get these jumpers moved to where they need to be and then plop on the ROMs. Alright, so we got the Neo Geo AES all hooked up, I got the prog and chaw board installed, and yeah, we're basically ready for testing. Now, when it comes to your conversion cartridges, I always recommend that you test them outside of the shell prior to putting them in the shell. The reason why is, if anything goes wrong, you want to make sure that you have access to the boards, so that way you can try to fix up whether it's like a dead ROM, a bad solder joint, or just maybe a dirty connection. Once you put it in the shell, you're basically committed at that point. Sure, you could always open and close it, but I would not recommend doing that too much, especially since AES cartridges are only held together with 7 tabs. Now, in terms of plugging the boards in, the way it works is a little backwards compared to looking at it from an MVS front loader, although it's generally the same as if you were to do it with an MVS top loader, you know, the MVS 1C. So the prog board goes into the back slot, while the chaw board goes in the front slot. And in terms of which side is exposed to the front, the solder side is exposed front ways, while the mask ROMs are exposed towards the back. But with that out of the way, let's just power it on. And we can see that it's booting up. So far, so good. Yeah, it's looking like it's working. Let's see if we can go through the intro sequence. Yeah, it looks good. So let's hit start. Normal mode, sure. Not really sure what these settings do, but let's just hit A. Up, down, left, right. Let's go Billy. Okay, let's start hitting some buttons. A, B, C, D. Select. It's a little hard to play the game one-handed. Well, you get the point. So we have a working Double Dragon AES cartridge. So all we need to do is put it in the shell and do some final dress up. Okay, last steps. We're going to talk about how we go about reassembling the AES cartridge. Now, first order of business is the cartridge guard here. Now, when it comes to installing the cartridge guard onto the AES shell, the longer side here needs to be linked up with the bottom shell, like so. And the reason why is because, well, much like as I demonstrated when plugging the cartridges in, everything works kind of backwards. So the back shell, it would technically be like the front shell of the MVS cartridge, for example. So as a result, that means our prog board needs to go in first. So I got the prog board here, as you can see. We're going to take the cartridge guard. And we're just going to slot it in like so. And we're just going to carefully guide it in. Make sure to get both of the tabs in so it's not overlapping. There we go. So now that we got the prog board in, we just take the CHA board, flip it over, and slide it in like so. And next, we just take the front shell, start from the top, and fold it in. And after that, you just press it down. All right, good to go. And as you can see, I already removed the original label because, well, yeah, the original label was not only really bad, but this is actually just photo paper that's been adhered on with double-sided sticky tape. So I'm gonna go ahead and install the new label onto the shell and should look very sexy. Alright, and with that, our Double Dragon AES conversion is complete. We went from a poorly done EEPROM bootleg to a nice AES conversion that uses authentic Double Dragon mask ROMs. Now, don't worry too much about the MVS parts. I do plan on using those cartridge parts for a later project, but for now, I'm just glad to have this cartridge in my collection. But what's a cartridge without a case, right? And much like how I removed the old label, I also went ahead and removed the old cover and installed a nice new English cover for the conversion cart. So we're just gonna open the case up, take our cartridge, and place it on there. And just to complete the package, throw in a nice English manual. So yeah, that's really all there is to it. So thank you all so much for watching. If you liked what you saw, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And yeah, as always, until the blue moon rises, I'll see you next time.